Welcome to today's Explainer. We spend so much of our time looking at letters, words, and sentences, but today we're actually going to focus on what you don't see. We're looking at those invisible forces, the hidden structural architecture that really governs clean design and typography.
Okay, let's dive into this. When you look at a massive billboard, a beautifully designed website, or even just a striking movie poster, what makes it feel so premium? Well, it turns out, the secret isn't usually in the letters themselves. No, it's actually in the negative space between them. Managing that empty space is literally the ultimate dividing line between amateur work and a true typographical masterpiece.
Section 1. Space between letters. Looking at micro-level spacing.
And that brings us to our first concept, kerning. Simply put, kerning is the manual adjustment of the horizontal space between two specific individual glyphs or letters. It is highly localized. You're not changing the spacing of a whole paragraph here. You're surgically going in and altering the distance between just two specific characters so they visually harmonize perfectly.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how certain letter combinations naturally create visual headaches. Just look at the word wave. Because of the steep diagonal angles of the A and the V, they naturally push each other apart. It leaves this glaring, airy gap right in the middle. Honestly, it looks like the letters are socially distancing. If you leave an A and a V completely unkerned, you get a super distracting gap. But with manual kerning, you can tuck that A perfectly under the V. This cohesive look is a precise aesthetic refinement. It's the kind of thing usually reserved for large, prominent text, where every millimeter counts. Think official logos and big, bold headlines.
Section 2. Space between lines, looking at macro-level architecture. Let's move to this and see how it builds on what we just learned.
So this brings us to leading, and yes, that actually rhymes with bedding. Leading is the vertical space between lines of text, and it's measured from the baseline of one line straight down to the baseline of the line directly below it. If manual kerning is a rare, surgical tweak, leading is an absolute, universal requirement for all body copy. It's a structural necessity that quite literally determines if a block of text is actually readable. To keep these two straight, just picture a graph. Kerning operates on the x-axis, right? It's horizontal, it's micro, and it deals with specific letter pairs. Leading, on the other hand, operates on the y-axis. It's vertical, it's macro, and it controls the structure of entire lines and paragraphs uniformly. They control completely different directions of space.
Section 3. The golden leading rule and the mathematical rules behind it.
So the crucial point is that unlike kerning, which is mostly a visual judgment call, leading relies on a pretty strict mathematical rule of thumb, 120 to 145%. For optimal readability, your line spacing really needs to fall right in this range relative to your font size. So say you're using a 10-point font, you absolutely need that extra 20 to 45% of breathing room so the reader's eye doesn't get completely lost, tracking from one line to the next.
Section 4. Visualizing the difference and how this impacts the reading experience.
If you drop your leading down to 110%, it is a crowded disaster. The bottom of the letters on one line literally crash into the tops of the letters on the next line, and it totally strains the eye. But bump that up to a balanced 135%, suddenly the text breathes. It's inviting. Now, if you go way too far, say 170%, the lines lose all cohesion. But 135%, that is the absolute sweet spot. The stakes here are incredibly high. Leading dictates basic legibility. It prevents that awful baseline overlap so your letters aren't physically crashing into each other. And on a purely practical level, it alters the physical footprint of your document. If you've ever needed to fit a report onto a specific number of pages, tweaking the leading is one of the absolute fastest ways to change the physical length of your text while keeping the structural integrity intact. It decides, quite literally, whether people will actually read your work.
Section 5. Intent in motion, looking at animated typography.
So how does this all apply when text actually starts moving? Well, let's take a lesson from the hit animated show Arcane. They opted for manual keyframe animation over motion capture because they wanted complete, absolute control over weight, body mechanics, and acting. They totally refused to leave spacing up to an algorithm. And this brilliantly illustrates our point about deliberate design.
In a show like Arcane, achieving that incredible stylistic freedom means manipulating structure. I mean, animators will literally break bones in the character models or use traditional squash and stretch techniques to exaggerate the impact of a kick or a punch just to make the motion flow smoother.
Well, motion designers working with typography do the exact same thing. They rely on precise kerning and strict leading rules so that when animated letters fly onto the screen, they land with solid, deliberate intent rather than feeling floaty or awkward.
You can really think of it as a metaphor of intent. Tweaking a specific kerning pair, like that tricky A and V, is exactly like an animator refining a single keyframe to perfect a character's stylized movement. Adjusting the leading? That's like building the foundation of the scene itself, setting the stage where everything interacts. Mastering these individual spaces is exactly what prevents the uncanny valley in animation, and it's what prevents visual fatigue in reading. It's what gives the final product its raw emotion and polish.
Which brings us to a final, vital question for you to consider. If every gap in your text carries actual structural weight, what intent is your negative space communicating? The next time you sit down for a design project, don't just see a collection of letters. See an interactive landscape of calculated, deliberate space. Remember, control the space and you control the impact. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep looking at the spaces in between.